All right, now that you have watched that video on corporal punishment, I want you to read these two letters to the editor regarding corporal punishment, two different sides of the issue. So read about how two different people argue against and for the use of corporal punishment in schools. And I want you to look at the bolded connectors in the paragraphs and identify what kinds of connectors do you see. Take a look at the paragraphs and do this now within the video. All right, students, welcome back. Let's go ahead and take a look at our answers. So hopefully you noticed that in this first paragraph from a U.S. high school history teacher, his use of for instance is an example of an example transition. In addition is adding new or more information. In fact, is a transition that actually adds emphasis. Granted is a transition that adds or connects ideas of concession. Nevertheless is refutation and otherwise signals ideas of condition. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the next paragraph. Indeed, again, is an example of emphasis. Admittedly is another kind of concession transition. For example is obviously example. And moreover is an example of additional information or introducing new or different kinds of ideas into your writing. On the contrary is an example of how you could use a transition for refutation. All right, let's first go ahead and talk a little bit about example connectors. So example connectors indicate that more specific illustrations of a previous idea will follow. And this is very important. It's not new or different information, but just more specific ideas following maybe general explanation. So some connectors that you can use are, for example, to illustrate, and for instance. Any of these connectors can be used within your sentences. Now let's take a look at an example of two independent clauses here and connected with the transition for instance. And what I want you to do is take a look at how to connect these two sets of sentences into one sentence using the connector here. Let's take a look at this first example here, and then you will do the rest on your own within the video. So students have gotten completely out of control. For instance, they talk on their cell phones during class. So you can write a sentence or connect these two ideas by having two separate sentences with a period at the end of one independent clause, for instance, with a comma, and then another independent clause. Another way to do this is to actually use a semicolon with a transition and a comma. So let's take a look here. Teachers use a variety of disciplinary measures. For example, some teachers assign additional homework. So notice how you can connect these two independent clauses into one sentence using the transition and a semicolon and a comma. One thing I want you to notice is that after each of these connectors, there are very specific examples or illustrations of the idea that came before. So teachers use a variety of disciplinary measures. What is one example of a disciplinary measure? And that would be assigning additional homework. All right, let's move on to information connectors, and you'll be combining these sentences together by yourself. So information connectors indicate that something more or new will be said about a previous idea. Here are some common information connectors that you can use in your academic writing. In addition, moreover, furthermore, and also. Any of these can be used interchangeably. It doesn't matter which one you use. The main thing is that you use a variety of them in your writing so that your writing does not sound too repetitive. So take a moment to look at these two sets of sentences and complete the combination of these two sets of sentences using correct punctuation in your sentences. All right, welcome back. Let's take a look at your answers here. So in this example, the student decided to create two separate sentences and use in addition at the beginning of the second independent clause followed by a comma. But it is also possible to connect these two ideas using a semicolon, in addition, comma. All right, let's take a look at the next one. Educators should not use corporal punishment, semicolon, moreover, comma. Now, one thing I want you to notice is that when you are using a semicolon, this is not a capital letter, so be very, very careful about that. All right, let's move on to our next set of connectors for practice. These are emphasis connectors. Emphasis connectors reinforce or strengthen previous ideas. Sometimes they do come in the form of maybe more specific examples, but not always. So some common emphasis connectors are indeed, in fact, actually, and as a matter of fact. Take a look here at these two sets of sentences with the connectors and practice combining these sentences together using the connector given here. Okay, welcome back. So let's take a look at the first example set and notice the use of the semicolon, no capital letter here, in fact, with a comma. Take a look here also at this sentence with the use of indeed. All right, let's take a moment and do some practice. So in this practice activity, what you will do is you will complete the statements below with your own ideas. So here's an example of how you might complete a sentence with an example transition. So there are a number of educational issues I would like to discuss in class. For example, I would like to discuss the amount of homework. I'm sure that's something a lot of you want to discuss. One thing I want you to notice about this is anytime you use a transition in this way here, you always have to have a complete independent clause, a subject with a verb afterwards. So be very, very careful about that. All right, here are some practice items for you to complete in the video activity here. These will be checked by the teacher after you have submitted your video. All right, so let's move on and let's talk about concession connectors. Now, concession connectors indicate partial agreement with a previous idea. You're going to be using concession and refutation in your next argumentative writing or persuasive writing assignment. And so some common concession connectors are words like granted, admittedly, naturally, and of course. So I want you to take a moment to look at these two sets of sentences. Notice the connection between these ideas in these two sets of sentences, and then combine them together. Notice particularly how the second sentence is showing partial agreement with the first idea up here. All right, welcome back. Let's take a look at our sentences here. So you can begin a sentence a new sentence with a capital letter and the transition followed by a comma. And of course, this is what a compound sentence looks like with a transition using a semicolon and a comma. All right, refutation connectors. So let's talk for a moment about refutation. Refutation transitions indicate direct disagreement or opposition to a previous idea. Some of the most common ones are on the contrary, nevertheless, nonetheless, and however. Take a moment to practice your combination of these sets of sentences using the transitions given. All right, welcome back. Take a look at your answers here and make sure that your capitalization and punctuation are correct. Okay, so this is our last set of connectors here, and these are connectors of condition. So connectors of condition indicate that if a certain condition exists, a certain result will occur. You have actually already encountered this type of condition transition, and that is otherwise. Take a moment here to look at the sentence and practice writing out the sentence using the connector. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at our answer here. So teachers need to be strict, otherwise students will not take rules and discipline seriously. It's what many teachers think in classrooms, unfortunately. Oh, I forgot about these connectors here. Yes, so connectors of restatement. This is really important. These are really important connectors when you are talking about, not a condition, but when you want to restate or explain something in a different way. So you can use connectors like that is or in other words. So take a moment to fully look at these two sentences here and consider the relationship between the two of them and use the connector here to combine them together into one sentence. All right, so that's our answer there for restatement. One of the things that you want to be very careful about in your punctuation of or use of transitions is you want to be sure that you don't commit an error called a run-on. So two independent clauses connected together with no punctuation is an error called a run-on. You always have to be using punctuation with these kinds of transitions. So, for example, some think corporal punishment is a very violent way of handling student problems. A number of teachers can take discipline too far. So you have an independent clause here and an independent clause here. You need to be, this is a run-on because there's no punctuation in between. What would be suggested would be to use a transition with punctuation to not only connect those two ideas, but solve the problem of the run-on. All right, so let's see what else we have here. Now, in the practice here, what I would like you to do is now practice completing these sentences using your own ideas and using the transitions given. Be sure that however you complete the sentence, it is a logical continuation using the transition here, that there is a logical connection between the ideas.